Welcome, Bronco Nation, to my review of the Boise State versus Air Force game. You'll notice this video is coming out much later than it usually would. Usually I try to have these review videos out by Sunday at the very latest. Usually I'll make them the night of the loss. But like most of you, I'm sure, after the interception, really, but after the final seconds ticked off on the clock, I just sat there in absolute silence, just staring ahead. I usually, if Boise State's lost a game, which I haven't had to do too much as a Boise State fan, but when they do, I usually turn the television off so I don't have to listen to the post game. And I didn't even do that. I just sat there staring ahead for almost 2 minutes, because this is something that none of us have really, unless you're a Boise State fan from a very long time ago, and I'm talking pre-2000s. This is something that none of us have had to experience. Boise State has never lost in post-2000s era, has never lost 4 games this early in the season, halfway through the season. And in fact, they've only ever, in the last 20 years, lost 4 games in the regular season, 2013 and 2015, but they got the last loss towards the end of the year. I mean, they were sitting at 2 losses or 3 losses for most of the year. 2005 was 4 losses, but the 4th loss came in the bowl game. So this is a new emotion. This is a new experience. And you know how I talked about my last video that I wanted to make it right away. I didn't really pregame it. I wanted to be in the emotion. I wanted to feel that energy, the BYU win. The Boise State win over BYU. I wanted to ride that momentum into the video. But that's not how I want to make a video after a loss. I don't want to ride the negative energy into the video, because that's not the right perspective as a fan. If you're riding the negative energy after the loss, then you're viewing everything in very short term, very minute. Your entire world is encompassed in this one game. All of Boise State's present and future becomes focused in this one game. You tend to nitpick every little bit and every little thing, and end up calling for certain coaches to be fired or certain players to be benched. But in reality, a loss doesn't define, or losses don't define a team. A loss doesn't define a season, and multiple losses doesn't define a team's future. Well, it does. The multiple losses do define that season. They don't define a team's future. And Boise State still has a very bright future ahead. Now, Boise State has a bye this week, thank goodness, so they can have a chance to recover from this and move forward. So I'm not making, obviously, a 3 keys to the game video, but I do want to make a more positive video after this one for Thursday-ish. I want to make a more positive video talking about that future, what Boise State what their future in the near future looks like this season, but more importantly, what it looks like down the road. But in order to do that, I need to put this game behind me. I need to put this game behind us. So I'm not going to talk about the big picture items so much in this video. I gave myself the time, so I think I'll be able to view the game from that big picture perspective. But I'm not going to talk about the coaching staff and what they can bring us in the future and all those items. I'm going to save that for my future video. This one I'm just going to break down offense, defense, special teams, how Boise State addressed my 3 keys to the game like a normal video, and then move on. So let's get into it. We're going to go straight to the offense here. Now, a lot of people, when I was talking about certain people calling for assistant coaches to be fired, a lot of people are going after Tim Plow big time. And that after this game, and really after this season so far, is not fair, because these are not Tim Plow's players. And I don't just mean that in that these aren't the guys that he recruited. You know, they don't have he can't be blamed for their performance. I mean, this isn't the players for his offense. The offensive style that Tim Plow runs is completely different than anything Boise State has run ever. They've never been an purely, truly air raid style offense. They've always been a balanced attack. And I think the air raid style offense definitely has merits and definitely has its own talking points, but it's not something that Tim Plow can come into this offense and implement. He has to work with a completely different offensive mindset, or at least that's ingrained in the players' minds, and try to co-opt his offensive mindset, which is completely different to theirs, together to create The goal is a winning football program. And we've seen that struggle this year. Now, Boise State's also lacking depth in certain positions. Offensive line had been a real mess. It's still not great, but it's definitely moving in the right direction, which I think is showing Tim Plow's coaching abilities. The fact that he's been able to fix to a certain extent the offensive line, an offensive line that was giving Boise State less than 50 yards rushing to now with even two of their main running backs out and on their third string running back can still put up over 70 yards rushing. I mean, this offensive line, they've played together for 3 games now, and they have looked okay in the Nevada game, good in the BYU game, and pretty good here in the Air Force game. They are moving the right direction. And the fact that he can come in and fix that problem, which I said at the beginning of the season was an unfixable problem, the fact that he can come in and fix that problem shows his coaching abilities and his leadership abilities. So we can't necessarily judge this offense entirely on Tim Plow because he's not working with the players recruited to run his offense. It's like trying to judge, not necessarily to the same extent, but it's like trying to judge Georgia Tech when they switch from an option offense to a regular passing, balanced attack offense. So the players just aren't built for it. And it's not necessarily that drastic of a change, but it is a significant change to go from a balanced attack to a pass-heavy attack. The second thing is that the offense actually performed pretty well this game, and I thought that they've been getting better and better each game, and they played pretty well this game. The thing that killed Boise State was penalties. Running, Boise State was, even with on their third string running back, was still able to put up 78 yards rushing. Passing, was able to throw for 259 yards, and if there had been a couple of key penalties there that wiped out passing plays, I mean, Bachmeier might have been up in the 300-yard category. I mean, he had at least one 20-yard pass, or more like 16-yard pass that got knocked out because of so-called pass interference on Riley Smith. That one would have added to the pass total there to put him up over 275 yards passing right there. So, Boise State, I thought, was running a pretty clean offensive attack. If you don't count the interception at the end of the game, and if you don't count the not turnover on downs, but the end of the half of the first half, so the 2 drives there. If you don't count those 2 drives, Boise State actually scored on 3 out of their 8 true drives that they had time to actually run through the field. And honestly, they should have scored on more if it wasn't for penalties. I'm going to save my discussion on the penalties towards the end of the game. I want to kind of sum up to the end of the video on the, to the end of the offensive summary here. I want to talk about other things first. But if not for penalties, whether earned or not, Boise State would have probably scored on 3 other drives if not for those penalties. So, we're looking at a Boise State team that scores on maybe 6 out of 8 drives versus 3 out of 8. And 3 out of 8 is still not a terrible number. I mean, it's bad, but it's not as bad as 3 out of 10 looks when you consider that the half was there was no time in the half and then threw an interception at the end. I thought the offense was moving pretty well, especially considering what was going on with the running game being not necessarily strength in this one. I thought the offense was moving pretty well, and they just kept killing themselves with penalties. I mean, 2 penalties that Boise State did earn were 2 holding penalties, back-to-back holding yards, that knocked them out from the Air Force 43 back to the Boise State 36, and then they ended up having to punt. So that's one drive right there where Boise State kills itself with penalties, and it's still an offensive line, holding penalties on offensive line, trying to figure itself out, trying to figure, third game in for this unit, still young and trying to figure things out. But Van Buren played an okay game, rushing wise. He didn't look like the Van Buren from the Air Force game last season, that's for sure. And I've said it before, I think Van Buren, when he's coming in as a change of pace running back, has a lot to offer this team. I think he's a valuable member of the team, but he's not a bell cow back. He's a Jack Fields type of running back where he's going to be able to pound you out a few yards, but he doesn't have top end breakaway speed, and he doesn't have the maneuverability. So the offensive line was getting some push. He wasn't getting hit in the backfield that often. He was usually getting hit 2 or 3 yards past line of scrimmage, but that was it. He'd get hit 2 or 3 yards past line of scrimmage, and then he'd end up going down. Okay game by Van Buren. Cobbs had a really nice game before he got hurt, so that was a big impact on the second half, was Cobbs' limited ability. Still made some catches, but you could tell he wasn't 100%. Came up limping in the first half there, a limp to the sidelines for going out of bounds there for the first half. So there were some issues that Boise State was dealing with, some self-caused penalties, some injuries, obviously players missing from this one. The Boise State was going in already, and they still managed to throw for 259 yards and 78 yards rushing. But I thought the offense overall played pretty well. The thing that killed Boise State in this one was horrible, horrible, horrible reffing. This Boise State's already lost a game due to reffing during the Oklahoma State game, where they clearly, two big calls clearly swung the entire game, and especially the terrible call on the fumble return that took the score off the board for Boise State. But this one, those were basically two main calls in a sea of mostly okay calls. This entire game was the worst refereeing performance I have ever seen at a Mountain West football game. And the referees for this game need to apologize to especially Boise State, but Boise State and Air Force for this one. It was amateurish. It was terrible. I saw better refereeing during the referee strike, the NFL referee strike, when they had to call in the backup refs to do it. I mean, it was horrible. It was just a terrible job. And we're going to run through the four biggest bad calls that absolutely, definitively terrible calls that swung this game towards Air Force. Honestly, I'm going to talk about the defense here, but offensively and defensively, these two teams were very evenly matched. This is a very good Air Force team. The fact that Boise State played as well as they did against them shows what this coaching staff is able to do. I mean, this is a good Air Force team. They're sitting now at 6-1. They have a quarterback who can run and pass, which adds another element. They have good wide receivers, and of course, there's always good running backs, and those wide receivers can also turn into kind of running backs in the running game there. So this is a very, very good Air Force team. They're not necessarily as good on defense as they have been in past years, but overall, a very deep, one of the best Air Force teams I've seen in a long time. And Boise State was close to winning this one, if not for the referees. Now, I'm not saying Boise State lost this game because of the referees, but these two teams came in evenly matched, played an evenly matched game throughout, and the refereeing definitely swung the tide in Air Force's favor. So we're going to go through that real quick here. The first one, pass interference on Riley Smith. Absolutely terrible call right towards the end of the first half there. Absolutely stupid call. Pass interference, he was blocking up against, he wasn't even blocking, he was running through the defender within the first 3 yards of the line of scrimmage, which you're allowed to do. He didn't grab him, he didn't push him. All he did was he put his arm out and he ran through him. If anything, the defender had pass interference on him. Now, did Riley Smith's actions against the defender help Boise State in a kind of rub sense? Yes, it did, but it was completely legal, and if anything, the defender was the one interfering with Riley Smith. He didn't target the defender. He just ran straight, and the defender was in his way. So he ended up knocking the defender out of the play there, but it was totally legal play, and they called pass interference with Riley Smith. What that did is it moved a reception by, I don't remember who caught, Cobbs, I think Cobbs caught the ball. So it moved a reception by Cobbs that had Boise State at the Air Force 48. Only 12 seconds left, but they're at the 48. They probably could have got another pass down to get them within field goal range. Really, honestly, with Dalmas' leg and his accuracy, or even Velasquez on a long kick, they probably would only have needed, maybe 10 more yards to be able to be in good kicking range here for Dalmas. That's one quick pass to the outside from the 43, and he's able to go out and kick a field goal there, which draws it up at the end of the half there with Boise State actually having a slight lead. So that was a really big call because it moved Boise State from the Air Force 48 to the Boise State 26. Killed any chance of getting anything done. Boise State just ended up having to kill the clock and go to the half. So that's 3 points. Pretty much guaranteed, because you can't necessarily guarantee that they'd be able to get that 10-yard pass, but with the way the Boise State's offense was clicking, especially after a big play like that, they run up, they have the timeouts, they get that pass off, they have the whole field to work with. Pretty much guaranteed that with the offense that they have, they'd be able to get those 10 yards and they'd be able to get that kickoff on the field. So, and then Dalmas 100% accurate, almost 100% accurate 90% of the time. What did he say? But, very, very accurate kicker, one of the best in Boise State history. He'd be able to get those points. So that's 3 points right there. Keeping track here. So Boise State lost this game, of course, 17-24 in this one. So 17-24 loss. And Boise State would have had to lead in that, but they'd have been close. It would have been 21-17. So been 21-20 if we were able to get that field goal. So they lost 24-17 in this one. And that's 3 points off the board right there. All right, next big one. So that's the first big referee move that killed the offense. So that's one drive. Boise State has now, if you remove that penalty, has now scored on at least 4 out of their 8 drives, not counting the interception at the end of the half. Second, ineligible player downfield on the center on a big play to Shakir, goes down, runs a, what did he run on that one? I think he ran a flag on that. So runs a flag route up, big play, big momentum, ton of yards. Boise State Air Force caught on their heels after Boise State's already been pushing at them with the run game, and then they call ineligible player downfield on the center when it was clear from the fans' perspective, from the viewers' perspective, and from the announcer's perspective that was a terrible call. The lineman was at the line of scrimmage. He was not past. If anything, he was barely past, but nothing worth calling. It was a terrible, terrible call. It removed that big play opportunity. Now, Boise State did end up going down and getting that play again 3 or 4 plays later, and then ended up not being able to punch it in on 4th and goal. But that killed the momentum in that drive. It allowed Air Force to reset. It forced Boise State to put a lot more energy into that. Their players were not as they were a lot more tired when they got down there towards the goal. The main point here is Boise State lost an opportunity to take advantage of a big setup play. Of a big play opportunity, use that momentum, come down, fire a quick strike, at least force Air Force to take a timeout, but fire a quick strike there after that first big play and possibly score. So I'm not going to say that 100% ends with a touchdown there, but I think the touchdown is much more likely on that play, on that drive, if Boise State gets that big play up front versus having to wait 4 plays later for it. So 3 points for sure off the board, potentially at this point 10 points off the board. So you're already looking at a score of 27-24. Boise State wins by 3. Now, let's look at the second terrible call. And this, for me, this is the most egregious. There's 2 really terrible calls, but this one is not one that you can overturn. So this was the most egregious to me. Boise State makes a first down. Hank Bachmeier, he has to scramble. There's nobody downfield. Actually gets a lot of time to throw. Isn't able to throw the ball. Scrambles outside, running for the first down marker, and he dives head first, that's the big key in this, dives head first, stretches out the ball, gets that first down. Well, the ref, the lineman coming up, line judge coming up, marked him down where he began his slide. That rule only applies if the quarterback slides with his feet to protect himself. It's to prevent the defender from feeling the need to slam the quarterback once he started diving. So it's supposed to protect the quarterback. But it only applies if he slides with his feet. If he dives head first for the stick, it is fair game. You can hit him, and he is down wherever he lands. Well, the line just came in and marked Bachmeier short based on where he had started his slide, which was short of the first down. But that's an incorrect call. That's a horrible call. In fact, he was the only person on the entire referee crew who knew that was a call that had been made. When Boise State, a few plays later, Bachmeier ended up fumbling the ball backwards about 19 yards. When Bachmeier ended up fumbling the ball backwards, the rest of the referee crew thought that it was second down. But because Bachmeier had not been marked first down on that play, because the crew had made the terrible call and then missed the opportunity to correct the line judge on that, Boise State ended up having third down. They ended up throwing a screen pass out to Van Buren, ended up being able to make about 7 of the yards back. So they would have been looking at a 3rd and 12, but a 3rd and 12 is manageable versus a third down that absolutely mandates a punt. Absolutely mandates a punt on that one. So Boise State, you're looking at a possibility where they were in a momentum. They were in a groove. They were driving. They were moving down the field. The backwards pass loses some momentum. But Boise State in 3rd and 12, and they converted longer than that. They probably would. They'd have had a chance versus guaranteeing having to punt the ball there. So I'm not necessarily saying that they go down and score for sure on that drive, but there's a chance that they are able to versus having no chance with the forced punt. The third one, and this for me is the most game impacting, not the most egregious, because miscalling a down is the most egregious. But this one right here is the most game impacting. And since I'm addressing all the fouls, I'll address it right now. Boise State, Air Force punts the ball. Boise State's defense comes up big, forces a punt. Air Force punts the ball away. the Boise State player, Kaniho at the time. Kaniho is blocking up away from the ball. The ball bounces at about the 5 or the 6 and rolls back. It does a big leaping roll back. The Air Force defender grabs Kaniho, pushes and throws him into the ball, which touches his elbow, and Air Force recovers. Well, that's forced touching. That is absolutely a penalty. You are not allowed to, if you are engaged in blocking, if you're engaged in blocking and it happens that you're pushing the guy back just from the normal methods of blocking and not intentionally in any way, the ball ends up bouncing off the return man, then it's okay. You're already engaged in your hold. But if you intentionally grab and pull and throw the player, which he did, there was a direct throw across his body from right to left to throw the Boise State player into the ball, that absolutely should have been called forced touching. Air Force ends up taking the ball in Boise State territory, punches it in a few plays later. That gives Air Force 7 points up on Boise State at that point, makes it a 2-score game, puts it pretty much out of reach at that point for Boise State. So two-score game. Yeah. Or maybe they kicked a field goal. Sorry. Anyhow, Air Force scores on that drive is my main point. Yeah, I think they kicked a field goal on that one, short yardage. But they score on that drive and make it a 2-score game for Boise State. Boise State, at this point, it's a 2-score game with about 2 minutes left. That changes their entire offensive philosophy on what they're able to do. But more importantly, it gives Air Force those 7 points. If you combine those 7 points from Air Force, which they absolutely would not have gotten, there was not enough time left. Air Force wasn't going to get the points. Boise State was going to have a chance to come down and either tie or take the lead. Air Force gets those points. Boise State, so Air Force now has 7 points up. If you take those 7 points, which without them, the game ends 24-24 and goes overtime. Without them, the game ends 17-17 and goes to overtime. Or if you take those 7 points and add the 3 points that Boise State would almost have guaranteed have gotten early, if not for the bad call on Riley Smith, Boise State wins by 3 in this one. And if you assume that Boise State would have scored off of the big play opportunity using that momentum, Boise State wins by 10 points. Either way, Boise State wins this game if not for the referees. A good effort on offense, could have been better, could have been some improvements, but a good effort on offense and an okay job on defense win this game for Boise State if not for the referees in this one. And I haven't even talked about the final play. Final play, Boise State scores, they get the ball back on an incredible onside kick, and then they throw an interception. Well, that interception play, and I know that, those kind of plays, they sometimes let the players play. They let them do a little bit of hand fighting. But the Boise State player was running downfield, tried to come out of his break, and the Air Force player absolutely grabbed him. Now, the Boise State player pushed back against the Air Force player grabbing him, and then when he saw it was going to be a pick, kind of interfered a little bit with the Air Force player, to be honest. But the Air Force player initiated contact and interfered first. That should have been pass interference on the Air Force player. It was blatant pass interference on the Air Force player. They didn't call it. Bachmeier shouldn't have thrown it. It was very well covered. Even if there hadn't been pass interference, it was a bad call or a bad decision by Bachmeier to force that ball. He shouldn't have thrown that pass. But that should have been pass interference. Boise State should have been 15 yards closer and a chance to go in and tie this game up. So Boise State ends up losing this one, definitely because of the 2 calls, the call, the pass interference call that was falsely called, even the the first down call that was incorrectly called, and then the forced fumble. But then there's a couple other ones in here that also throughout just show the nature of how terrible this officiating crew and how it swung the balance throughout the game, swung it against Boise State in this one. So offense overall, I'm giving them a B+. I thought it was a B+ effort out there today. I thought that the offense played better than I was expecting, honestly, considering who was out on the rushing side. And considering that Boise State struggled in the past against some of these Air Force defenses. But Boise State, I thought, played pretty well overall. If you take out the if you take out the field goal, or if you add in the field goal that Boise State should have gotten, and if you add in a touchdown probably on the big play drive, Boise State scores on 5 out of their 8 drives, which is a pretty good percentage here overall in the game. So offensively, their struggles here, I'm pinning that on the fouls, whether earned or not. Boise State, I believe they had 7 fouls for like 83 yards or something like that in this one, but it killed their offense. And that's part of, I would say that's part of having a young team, and definitely those 2 fouls on the offensive line are part of that. But more than anything, that is on the referees. Absolute terrible decision-making and calls by the referees in this one that just destroyed the Boise State offense. The fact that they put up as many yards and scored as many times as they did despite this refereeing crew is actually a pretty big statement for this Boise State offense. All right, let's move into defense here. I'm not going to talk too much about the offense anymore, and I'm going to move into defense. I'm going to try to run through this quickly because, like I said, I want to get this loss behind us and move forward. Honestly, the most aggravating part of this game for me was the refereeing. We've already talked about it. We're going to move forward here. All right, defense overall. I said in my 3 keys to the game that Boise State would have to play assignment football. They'd have to have a hat on a hat, and they'd have to be making sure that they're not trying to do too much as a player, that you're not trying to think, okay, I got to cover the quarterback and the pitchman and the dive. No, you play your assignment. Usually defensive end gets quarterback, the linebacker gets the running back, and then the cornerback usually gets, or linebacker gets the pitchman. Assignment football, every man gets 1 guy. You should see 3 or 4 players on the ground being tackled every single drive. And we didn't see that in the first half. That was Boise State's really big issue. They actually did a great job stopping the dive man. The dive man in this, it was Air Force's main running back here, Roberts. He only had 45 yards rushing in the first half. The way that Air Force got its yards was the quarterback scramble and the pitchman. Boise State was not able to cover either of those in the first half. 70 yards rushing by Hazik Daniels here, and 51 yards rushing by the pitchman, Davis, the wide receiver for Air Force. In fact, in the first half, J.L. Skinner was the leading tackler for Boise State. That should never be the case when you're running against an option offense. If the safety is having to get involved, you've already failed. The safety is not the one who should be covering any of the option players. The safety man is your safety valve. He's your guy in the backfield that comes in if the assignments have broken down. When you're running against an option offense, you should have people in the backfield every single play, and the safety is not going to be able to do that unless you're calling him in on a blitz, which Boise State wasn't doing. So it should be your cornerbacks should be right there, fighting through the wide receivers are trying to block them, and right there to break up the pitch every single time. And it wasn't. J.L. Skinner was having to go tackle the pitch man almost every single play. And that's not what you want to be seeing there. Boise State had a couple of nice stops. That Air Force, they had a nice stop on 3rd and short. I thought that was really well done. You actually, on that play, saw 3 players on the ground. The running back, the quarterback, and the pitchman all ended up on the ground. It was perfectly run. Perfect assignment football. Air Force, unfortunately, just able to power through. Like I said, this is a good Air Force team. They're a very deep Air Force team. They're more experienced than they ever have been before because of that COVID extension that Air Force has never had before. They never had that chance to build depth on the roster. Usually, you don't get redshirt years at Air Force. You get 4 years and you're done. So you take advantage as much as you can. Well, Air Force got to give its players, or some of its players, redshirt years. So they're very deep, they're fresh, and they're very, very and a very experienced roster, coaching staff and players overall. So we saw that on that 4th and goal, 4th and short. Air Force able to power ahead, get a touchdown. But Boise State played good assignment football on that 3rd down. They came up with a big stop there towards the end of the half. Matlock had a huge sack to prevent a potential passing situation there by Air Force. So there were some good moments in the first half, but the big issue was complete inability to cover the pitchman. And like I said, the last time a new head coaching staff came in at Boise State, it took them 3 games to figure out how to win against the option and really how to cover the option. And I don't think they really figured it out until a couple of games after that. So Boise State really struggled against Air Force the first 3 years under Brian Harsin, and that's because his option offense, like I talked about, is so hard to cover. You have to be so disciplined. You have to know exactly what changes you need to make as a defensive coach. You have to be able to know exactly which players are going to have, not just necessarily have the best skill set, because when you're covering the option, it's not about the most talented. It's about the players, the smartest players with the most awareness, and figuring out which players are going to be able to do that job against the option offense. So Boise State struggled there in the first half, but they did a great job of stopping the dive. They played with power, winning those assignments up front. Move on to the second half, complete reversal. Boise State did an outstanding job. In fact, great adjustments by the defensive coordinator in this one. Outstanding adjustments by the defense, by the players, and by the defensive coordinator. There was always a Boise State player in the backfield there for the pitch, standing there, preventing the pitch from happening, busting through their assignments, or just being there, actually calling a defense that put a defender in that spot. JL Skinner wasn't the main. Actually, I think Wimpy ended up being the main defender on this one by the end of the game. So you saw a Boise State defense that had a linebacker. A linebacker is a good player against an option offense to be your main tackler. That's what you want to see. It means that you're actually calling your assignments correctly. He's going to be down there on the line. You don't want your safety, your outlet guy, to be it. That's like if you're facing a passing team and your corners and safeties have the most tackles, it means that their ball is always getting downfield. And against an option offense, it means that the option is busting through the first and second line of defense. So outstanding job defending against the pitchman in the second half. In the second half, Hezek Daniels, 70 yards in the first half, only had 13 yards rushing in the second half. No scores, 2 scores in the first half. And then Davis, the pitchman, went from 51 yards to 32 yards. So he was still making a couple plays, but most of those yards came on like 2 long runs that he ended up being able to bust. The issue that Boise State had, and it wasn't play calling, because he was getting hit. Roberts was getting hit. The dive man was getting hit every time. It's inability to wrap up or to stop the dive. Roberts, 45 yards rushing in the first half, had 93 yards rushing in the second half. This Boise State defense, and it showed the issues that Boise State has up front, which is a lack of depth on the defensive line. And we saw that. I mean, Roberts was getting hit every play. There was a defender in the hole. He just wasn't able to wrap up or able to, that's basically it. He wasn't able to wrap up against Roberts, and Roberts was able to bust through. And that just comes from fatigue. It just shows that this, like I said, Air Force offense, very deep, very strong, very experienced, just being stronger than Boise State. And unfortunately, we're at a point with Boise State that there are going to be teams out there, even in our own conference, right now, this season at least, that are stronger and have better players in certain positions than Boise State. The recruiting has really gone downhill over the last few seasons. Boise State's really started to plateau. The skill difference. Boise State still, in my opinion, with the right coaching and with the right mindset, is still the best team in the conference. Are they the best team this year? No. But they're still the best team, absolutely the best team in the conference. But that divide has gotten much smaller than it was. And there's teams out there that are very close to Boise State and that have the right keys, the right elements to go out and beat Boise State on a more regular basis. Air Force has already been one of those teams. So coming in, like I said, with a Boise State team that's taken a step back, especially this season, Air Force is already going to come in with a bit of an advantage. So that's to be a little bit expected there. It would have taken a miracle performance for Boise State not to have gotten worn down on the defensive side. The bit that really impresses me here for Boise State, that just makes me go, this is a great defensive staff that I know has the ability to take Boise State into the future, is the fact that they were able to make those adjustments. Now, I wish they'd come in the first half through that. I think we'd have seen a completely different game if they had. But the fact that they were able to make those second half adjustments gives me hope that this is not going to be a defensive staff that's going to take 3 games to figure out how to beat Air Force. So overall, I think I already said it, B+ performance for the offense, but overall C+ performance for the defense, just because they didn't make the right calls in the first half and they couldn't make the stops in the second half. But only 3 points allowed in the second half, and they allowed 3 touchdowns in a row in the first half, and then they had 2 3-and-outs, 3 punts, and forced 2 field goal attempts. in the second half there. Yeah, in the second half. So 2 3-and-outs, 3 total field goals attempts. So he had one drive where they had like 7 plays, but then still had to push a punt and missed a field goal, and then ended up making a field goal. But 3 punts and 2 field goal attempts, and only 3 points allowed in the second half. They might have been worn down. They were still time possession. Air Force had 18 minutes ish in the first half, and they had 18 minutes ish in the second half. So same time possession, but real bend but don't break there in the second half. So definite improvement for this Boise State defense, but not enough to get Air Force off the field. I mean, Air Force at that point with a lead, even if they're not scoring, driving out the clock right there is just as dangerous as if they were going down lightning fast and scoring. In fact, probably more dangerous because it limits Boise State's abilities to answer, which we saw. So this Boise State defense, C+ overall, but I definitely saw a lot of things that give me a positive outlook on this defense going forward in the future. Okay, we're almost done here. I'm already at 35 minutes, and I don't want to spend too much more time talking about this loss. So we're almost done here. Special teams performance, A overall. Great performance by the special teams. Honestly, great performance by the special teams. Dahlman's made both of his field goals. Like I said, I wish he'd had at least one more opportunity to make a field goal, a long field goal. I think he would have done it, but unfortunately that did not happen due to refereeing. But he made a 1 of 1, long of 37. Outstanding job by him as always. Velasquez, okay job punting, 43.8 average, nothing to necessarily, no step backs there. But the big thing for Velasquez, had an amazing onside kick. Absolutely incredible onside kick. Absolutely great job. It kicked perfectly. Boise State able to go down and recover it. And I believe, I should have looked it up, and I apologize for not doing this, but I believe it's the first time Boise State's recovered onside kick since Cedric Wilson did it against Colorado State. So, outstanding job. Ultimately, it just ended up bringing our spirits as fans up high enough to be smashed to the ground again, unfortunately. But you can't blame the special teams for that. It's not their fault. So special teams did a great job being able to recover the onside kick. Hindsight, I wish Riley Smith had been able to stay inbounds when he recovered it. But the fact that he was able to recover it, period, that's the highlight. That's the important bit. And he was already kind of leaning in the direction of going out of bounds before he recovered it anyway. So the fact that he was able to keep his feet in is an outstanding job by him. But I actually did say this when he recovered. I meant, oh man, he caught it. I wish he'd scored. But unfortunately, as it ended up. But great job by Velasquez and by Riley Smith in recovering that. So great job there. As far as the return game goes, it was okay. Cobbs had a really nice 33-yard return after the third Air Force touchdown. Again, refereeing ended up killing that drive with the bad call against Riley Smith. But it was a good return to set Boise State in good field position there. One questionable thing and two really questionable issues here. Boise State tried a squib kick there I believe it was in the first half. They tried a squib kick against Air Force. Didn't really see the need for that or why they did that. And Air Force ended up recovering it and getting the ball to 41. I don't know if they were just saying, well, Air Force is probably going to score anyway. It was at a point where Boise State was not stopping them defensively. So, hey, give them a shorter field to work with so they kill less time. I don't know what the mindset was or why they chose to squib kick it there. Maybe try and catch Air Force off balance. Maybe they saw something they didn't like or that they liked in the Air Force setup. But it was a weird decision, and it gave Air Force the ball at 41. And then Boise State at one point when going up against the punt was lucky not to get a roughing the kicker. It should have been a roughing the kicker. He hit the plant leg, but for some reason they only called running into the kicker. I think they said he might have been pushed into the kicker's plant leg. But lucky not to get that. That's kind of a little bit of a mark against them. The biggest one, of course, is that forced touching, but I don't put that on the special teams. That's not their fault. That's why they still get an A in this one, because they didn't do that. The defense, the Air Force did that. Now, I am going to touch real quick on something, and I've talked a lot about how much I admire and love Andy Avalos. I still do. I think he's a great coach. My next video, I'm going to talk about Andy Avalos and what he can do for this program going forward. But Boise State should have challenged that play. They absolutely should have challenged that play. It's a play that can be challenged, and he should have thrown the challenge flag and challenged that play. Even if it wasn't, but even if it had been probably Boise State's fault for touching the ball, even if he thought that, it's a huge, absolutely game-changing decision. And there's not that much time left, so the timeouts aren't going to help you that much. You're still probably looking at an onside kick. Boise State needed to challenge that play regardless of the result, regardless of how it happened. And as it turned out, Boise State probably would have won this challenge because it was clear and obvious that he was pushed into the ball there. Replay should have changed it. They didn't because it was a terrible crew, but it should have been challenged, and he didn't. I love Andy Avalos. I love what he's doing with this program. He was a great player for Boise State, and I think he has the right mentality of bringing Boise State in the future. But from time to time, he gives off, and not that this is a bad thing all the time, but he gives off a little bit of a Chris Peterson vibe. And Chris Peterson was a great coach for Boise State, but one of the few issues I had with Chris Peterson is that he didn't show a lot of energy on the sideline for most of the game. I mean, there were a couple things that would get him riled up or get him angry. I mean, his reaction after winning the Fiesta Bowl against Oklahoma was awesome. But for the most part, he was pretty calm and stoic. And you want that presence, that calm. You don't want to coach like Gary Patterson. I hate him so much. Gary Patterson is just screaming at players and referees the whole time and acting like a massive baby. You don't want that. But you do want at times a coach that's going to put a little fire into the team, maybe a little fire into a player who needs it. And at times, a little fire into a refereeing crew that is absolutely messing up the game for Boise State. And that fire would have helped in this case. I loved Brian Harsin for that. I think he had a good balance between being calm when he needed to and getting in someone's face when he needed to as well. And Andy Avalos, he's a hard-nosed linebacker who lights people up. We need to see a little bit of that, coach, on the sideline here. Not all the time. Your personality's great. Humility, humbleness, blue-collar work ethic. That's awesome. But a little more energy, and honestly, Boise State dropped the ball here. And Avalos, and I hate to see it, dropped the ball here by not challenging this obvious forced touching by Air Force there. But that's part of being a brand new head coach. That's part of being a brand new head coach at Boise State, at your alma mater, with an inexperienced coaching staff overall, is learning and improving and growing from these things. And I think going forward, next season, we're not going to see these same mistakes for a lot of things, and maybe that's something that won't repeat itself either. So I think that's emblematic more of being a young and inexperienced coach than it is him as his personality as a whole. But it would be nice, because it kind of led me into that, to see a little bit more fire from time to time from Andy Avalos on the sideline there. And I think the players would react well to that as well. Okay, real quick here. How did Boise State recover? I've already addressed pretty much all of this already, but I'm just going to hit it real quick. How did Boise State perform against my keys to the game? Cover assignments and play one snap at a time. I just analyzed all of this. So C+, same grade as the defense, because that's really how the defense got its grade. First half couldn't cover the pitch. Second half can cover the pitch, but can't cover against the dive. So, but the big thing here is I said play one snap at a time. Don't get drawn up and up, and then Air Force hits you over the top. Air Force only threw for 59 yards, and they got all that on one pass. 1 out of 5. Boise State did have a wide open Air Force receiver that Zeke Daniel missed. And then they gave up a big pass. But in the second half, they didn't allow any big passes, and they did a great job shutting down. That was 59 yards came in the first half, and Zeke Daniels didn't have anybody to throw to, even though he tried 3 more times in the second half. Boise State was on it. They reacted well. They made the right adjustments, and there was no more openings for Air Force to throw to in the second half. Air Force's 59 yards, and this one is actually the least passing yards allowed by a Boise State defense since 2016. So a great, really, really good job playing that one snap at a time. Probably A+ on that effort, but just covering assignments overall, C+ effort overall for this Boise State defense. Okay, offensive line show it's made of. I'm giving it a C in this one because it was still only 78 yards rushing, and they weren't able to push it in on 4th and goal. The first, second, third, fourth, and short there at the goal line where Boise State was not able to man up and get the ball over the line of scrimmage. That by man up, I mean being able to go up against the other guy on the other side and prove yourself superior. That cost Boise State the game here. I was not a fan of Boise State going for it on 4th and goal. You need 2 scores to beat Air Force anyway. Take a field goal here, and that way, if Air Force ends up scoring, you are still only 1 possession back as long as you can hold them to a field goal. Boise, I forgot to talk about this offense, so I want to talk about it here. If Air Force is doing what they're doing in the first half, where they're just scoring a touchdown in you every single drive, and it's just you basically, whoever scores last wins, then you go for it on 4th down there. But Boise State's defense has stopped them twice in a row. There was no reason at that. The defense was showing up. They were proving superior at that point to what Air Force was putting out. There was no reason to try and go for the touchdown when a field goal would work. The defense is probably going to get you the ball back, and then you go down, score, and win the game. Or at the very least, defense probably holds Air Force to a field goal, which they did, field goal attempt, which they missed, and a field goal later on. But they probably hold them to a field goal, and then, if Air Force kicks the field goal, you're not 2 scores behind, which is the worst case scenario against this Air Force team as a whole. And I think, again, inexperience, not realizing where you're at with the game, how things have changed, coaching staff made the wrong call there. So inexperienced coaching staff, which I think is going to improve going forward, but ultimately that decision not to go for it, put it on the offensive line. The offensive line did not prove worthy in this one. Third game in as a unit, really working together, still developing things, but they weren't able to win the battle up front and get Boise State the score there. So that's going to give them the C overall, but they did allow only 2 sacks, allowed Bachmeier to throw for 259 yards, and if you remove the negative 4 yards from sacks, they allowed 82. They managed 82 yards rushing with the third string running back out there. So I thought Boise State's offensive line played pretty well overall, but the inability to get the ball across line of scrimmage in crunch time when you really need to score is you can't get a higher grade than C when you're part of the reason your team lost the game in this one. All right, Boise State's future step up. Taquan Tyler, Tyler, the sophomore running back, 3 rushing yards for 3 attempts for 16 yards. He has amazing speed. His first run was electric. I mean, it was like a 13-yard scramble right off the right side. He looked very, very speedy, and then he only touched the ball 2 more times. I really wish that Boise State had used him more in this one. I mean, he's got some Devin Demas type speed out there. I think that he could be a major contributor for this Boise State team. It's mind-boggling to me that with the speed that they had and the fact that Van Buren doesn't have that speed, that they didn't try to use him, especially with an offensive line that is showing some improvements but still struggling to get big, significant push up front. Use that speed on the outside to help your offensive line out. I don't understand unless... I mean, I can't even say the coaches saw something different because he was showing that speed. That speed doesn't change, and he has it. So I don't understand not using him as much as or using him as little as they did in this one. Banya, 3 tackles, and then really the only other Boise State future that I talked about that got a chance to step up in this one was Kaniho, 2 tackles. We didn't get to see in this one, or at least he didn't make any tackles, didn't make any statistical appearances in this one. Tubner in this, and then Boise State didn't try out any of their bench or freshman receivers that are sitting their next line of Boise State offense out there. They didn't try Capel, they didn't try McCosker, they didn't try Richford, they didn't try Ben Ford. And I think this would have been a good game, especially with a couple of players there not necessarily showing up and highlighting Boise State's offense. I think it would have been a good chance to give some of these players a chance to go out and make that statement. We just didn't see that. So I'm giving it a D overall, but not necessarily because it's more of a D on the coaching staff for not giving these young players the chance they deserve. Biggest overall, Tyler Crow. Why didn't we see Tyler Crow in this one? He's been playing great. Unless he was hurt, which I don't think he was. I haven't heard anything about him being hurt. Unless he was hurt, why didn't we see Tyler Crow in this game? A guy who's been stepping up, making some outstanding plays. I think his just absolute fire and ability to just drive through people would have been a big benefit here, especially down there at the goal line. Van Buren obviously is your main goal line back there, but maybe give Tyler Crow a shot. I don't understand why we didn't see him at all in this one. I didn't record any stats in this one. I didn't notice him in the backfield during this game. So maybe he was dealing with an injury. It would be right on cue with Boise State's backfield suffering some injuries this week, but I didn't hear anything about that, so very surprised we didn't see that. So D overall, not necessarily on the players. The players performed, I thought, as well as they could have on the circumstances, just not given the opportunities necessarily in the scheme. Okay, so that's it for my review of the Boise State game versus Air Force. I'm going to be coming out with a video here probably Thursday, a little bit more positive tone, a lot more positive tone, talking about a little bit about the season so far, but mostly talking about Boise State's immediate and long-term future. So I hope you stick around and watch that. Make sure to like and subscribe if you haven't before. I know this isn't necessarily a video you want to like. It's a loss, but it's a tough one to do, but I feel I wouldn't be fair to myself or to you if I didn't give us a chance to kind of sit down together and talk this one out. So hopefully the team is moving forward, which I'm sure they are. We've got a bye week here before going up against Colorado State. So big chance Boise State to turn things around. But honestly, we're 4 losses into this season, and there's some really tough games coming up. So it's not necessarily going to be the best. It isn't. We already know it's not the best season. Probably going to be one of the worst seasons in Boise State history. but we can still build on that to a brighter future, and that's what my next video is going to talk about. So thank you for watching this video. Make sure you like and subscribe, and as always, go Big Blue!